It's Jay, and I'll be teaching you Intermediate Java Lesson 1. Some quick rules: try to be respectful, use your full name, turn on your camera, and try to stay on task. So at the end of this course, you can get some awards. So you could get a certificate of completion or a certificate of completion and full attendance. And in addition to those, you have the option of possibly getting an Outstanding Student Award or a Junior Mentor Award. Alright, so for an overview of today's lesson, we're going to be reviewing beginning Java. We're going to be going over variables and types, if statements, and finally loops. So first, you're going to create a CodePad account if you haven't already. You'll go to codepad.app, you'll create an account, and then you'll log in using what you can see right here. And then you're finally going to create a new Java pad. So for types of data, we have a couple different types of data. The first is an integer, or an int, which is a number without decimals. These can be positive or negative, so like 1, 7, 100, -1. And then next we have doubles. So these are a number with decimals. So 1.0, 3.14, 56.23, -3.4, anything with a decimal. Next we have strings. These are words with letters, and you use quotation marks in order to tell the computer that's a string. So cat, hello world, sang are some examples. Next, characters or chars. These are just a single letter, and they can use these single quotation marks. So like A, B, I, etc. And finally, we have booleans. So booleans are either true or false, and they have no other possible values. All right, some quick checks for understanding. Try to pause now and fill each of these out on your own. All right, let's go over the answer. So first, quotation marks hello, that is a string. 5, that is an int. Single quotes G, that is a char. False, that is a boolean. And 3.1415, that is a double. All right, on to declaring variables. As a quick warm-up, after you make your new CodePad, try to make an int, char, string, and boolean variable. So that's 4 different variables in all. And you're going to name them and give them whatever values you'd like, and then you're going to print them all out. And as a hint, if you've forgotten, the print command in Java is system.out.println. And then you'll put whatever you're printing in between these parentheses right here. So try to pause this and do this on your own on your CodePad. All right, here's an example of what you might do. Int watermelon equals 21, boolean like watermelons equals true, string name equals watermelon, char water equals W. And then if we print them all out, you can see each of these values printed out. All right, next on to if statements. So essentially the format here is if, parentheses, inside you're going to have a boolean, and then curly brackets, and inside is going to be the code to execute. So if you might recall, a boolean is either true or false. So if the boolean is true, then it'll execute this code. If the boolean is false, then it'll just skip over the entire if statement and not do anything. So try to figure out, what does this code do? Pause now and see if you can figure it out. All right, so let's look at what this code is doing. First, it's checking if 1 is less than 5, then we're going to print out 1 is less than 5. If x mod 2 is equal to 1, print 22 is odd. So in this case, x is equal to 22, which means it's the same thing as 22 mod 22. So right here, what mod does is it's a type of mathematical operator that it's essentially going to find the remainder. So if you find the remainder of 22 divided by 2, that is going to be 0. However, if it were 23, the remainder was going to be 1. So this would be true, and it would print out this statement right here. And the final statement is if x minus 2 is equal to 20, system.out.println potatoes. In this case, 22 minus 2 is equal to 20, so it will print out potatoes. Now let's try an activity. In your CodePad, declare an int variable and print something if the number is even. As a hint, you can use modulus operator to figure out if it's even. Pause now and try this on your own. All right. Here's the answer. In your main class, you're going to use public static void main, If you might remember, this is the typical formatting for your main method. Anything inside here is going to be executed. Next, you're going to say int sint for this example is equal to 5, and if sint mod 2 is equal to 0, system.out.println, the integer you number entered is even. So in this case, if the remainder of something divided by 2 is 0, then we know it must be even. Next, let's talk about public versus private variables. So in Java, you can declare variables to be public or private. Public variables can be accessed or redefined in any class, but private variables can only be accessed or redefined in the classes that they are created in. So let's give an example of class main. Inside the main method right here, we create a private int watermelon and a public string name. You can print both of these out, and both of these can be accessed and printed because we're in the main class. But if we went into another class, say I go into class banana, and I try to access string name, then sure, I can print it out. But if I try to access int watermelon, then it'll throw an error because it's private and so I can't access it outside of the class. Next, let's talk about loops. So the first type of loop we're going to talk about is called a for loop. So for, then int, whatever right here, is equal to 0, and then your variable name less than 5, and then variable name plus plus. And then inside here, you're going to have your code. So let's break down the syntax of this loop. First, you're saying for in order to let it know that it's a for loop. Next, you're setting your initialization. So right here, you're just saying int I is equal to 0. So you're just creating an int I and setting it to 0. This is just going to be done once at the start of the loop. Next, this is your end condition. So you're saying while I is less than 5, continue to loop through this loop. And finally, after every single iteration of this loop, you're going to do whatever is here. So in this case, you're going to add 1 to I. I++ is the same thing as saying I is equal to I plus 1. You're just adding 1. And then inside this loop, every single time it goes through this loop, it's going to print out I. So the output would be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then once I is 5, it's going to see, oh, I is no longer less than 5, so we're going to skip out of this loop. And I is automatically a private variable that's only accessible in the for loop. On the other hand, we have while loops. So in this case, instead of actually creating your int I equals 0 inside your loop, you're creating the int I equals 0 before the loop. So this means that it's going to be a public variable, at least within the class. So you're going to be able to access this variable outside of the while loop, versus in the for loop, you can't access int I outside of the for loop. So here, we're creating int I equals 0, and you're saying while I is less than 5, print out I, and then add 1 to I. These two loops actually do the exact same thing. They're just formatted differently. Next, we have a do-while loop. So this is similar to a while loop, except you always know that you're going to complete the action at least once. So what this does is it tells you, do this at least once, and then check if it's less than 5. If it's less than 5, then do it again. Otherwise, skip out of this loop. So the difference between a do-while loop and a while loop is that a while loop could just not do it at all. Like for example, let's go back to the previous slide and let's look at this while loop. If I was set equal to 5 right here, if we say int I equals 5, and then we say while I is less than 5, well, 5 is not less than 5, so we're automatically going to skip out of this loop without ever going through it. On the other hand, a do-while loop, you're automatically going to do that, and then only after you do it at least once are you going to check whether the condition is true. Do-while isn't used as often, but it's really useful when, for example, maybe you want to make a game and you want to play at least one round of the game, and then after you'll check with the user whether they want to play again. Let's try an activity. Try to write a program that outputs every even number from 0 to 20. And if you'd like a challenge, try to write 2 versions of this program using a for loop in one and a while loop in the other. Pause now and try this on your own. Alright, here's the answer. So in our main class, we're going to go into our main method, and we're going to make a counter int equal to 0, and then we're going to say while counter is less than or equal to 20, if counter mod 2 is equal to 0, essentially, if the remainder of dividing counter by 2 is equal to 0, or in even simpler terms, if counter is even, then print out counter. And then at the end, regardless of whether you printed out counter, you're going to add 1 to counter. So this is going to start at 0, and it's going to go all the way up to 20, and whenever the counter is even, it's going to print out the counter, otherwise it's just going to add 1 and go to the next number. Now we have our for loop, which does the exact same thing, but is a lot shorter. Int I equals 0, while I is less than or equal to 20, I plus equals 2. So this is just short for I is equal to I plus 2, or add 2 to I. This is another way you could do it. So instead of just adding 1 and checking whether the counter, or I in this case, is even, instead, you can just start at 0 and then you can add 2 each time. So you know automatically that it's only going to be even. So these are two possible interpretations of how you could have approached this problem. All right, that is the end of the first lesson of intermediate Java. I hope you guys enjoyed today's lesson, and thank you for watching.